Good afternoon, and welcome to the University of Toronto Mississauga's webinar on mindfulness and well-being. My name is Brianna Croft, and as a UTM alumna, I'm so pleased to welcome you today and look forward to what is sure to be an enlightening presentation. I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Welcome, everyone. Following this presentation, there will be a moderated question and answer period, and we encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. However, please hold off on submitting your questions until after the initial presentation is finished, as your questions may be addressed during that time. If you're having any technical difficulties, please use the Q&A button and one of our staff will be there to assist you. And as I mentioned moments ago, my name is Brianna Croft, and a bit on my background, I work as a manager of healthcare strategy and innovation at Shoppers Drug Mart, helping Canadians live long, healthy lives. And previous to Shoppers, I worked for AlayaCare, a cloud-based software company, and I've also worked for SE Health, a health and social enterprise with a major focus on impacting the future of health and aging at home. My career is focused on evaluating and testing new business models that leverage digital transformative technologies and improve care for the chronic disease and aging population. As well, I graduated from the Masters of Management of Innovation program at UTM in 2018, and I am so proud to be a board director for UTM's Alumni Association. As well, today I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, fellow U of T alumni, Professor Bani ALO. So welcome. Bani currently has her business called Enjoy the Journey, where she teaches and facilitates stress reduction and personal growth. She works with businesses, schools, hospitals, and individuals desiring to live their best lives. Bani has lived in Rochester, New York for the past 27 years, but visits Toronto regularly to see her family. She is also an avid yogi and teaches weekly yoga classes. Thank you so much for being with us today, Bani.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for that introduction. I appreciate that. Yes, I feel very blessed that I got to go to the University of Toronto for my undergrad, and I have continued to love to learn about the topics that I'm interested in. So currently, I'm taking an online training to advance my yoga certification. Well, this past weekend, in part of the training, it was on Ayurvedic medicine, which is ancient Indian medicine. Now, she said something that really stood out to me. And she said there are 3 times a day when we can either poison our body or contribute to its good health. And those are breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that really resonated with me, and I took that in because I really do believe that our food is our fuel. It nourishes our body. And I try my best to do that as well, although I do fall off the wagon at times. I'm blessed also that I have, my dad was very into healthy eating from the time I was pretty young. So I had that influence that has helped me tremendously. But this talk today, I'm going to propose that there is something that affects our health even greater than our food. And that is our thoughts, the mind. And that's why I've entitled this Training the Mind, or Training the Brain for Greater Health. They say that we have between 50 and 70,000 thoughts a day, which means we have between 50 and 70,000 times a day where we can either poison our body or contribute to its good health. A lot of us are aware kind of the older model of medicine where it was just whatever our genes were, that's probably what we were going to get, what our parents or grandparents had as far as health and wellness and any of their illnesses or diseases. Now, a lot of the new medicine and epigenetics, which means above genetics, there's the understanding that the genetic predisposition is just more of a blueprint. And depending on the environment of the body, is going to determine whether that blueprint will actually be manifested into those illnesses, diseases, or not. So I want to tell you a little bit more about me. I have an Italian grandmother that grew up in our home for the most part. She stayed with us for very long periods of time. And it was wonderful for many, many reasons. As you could probably guess, her cooking was phenomenal always. She was always very loving and nurturing. But one thing that my grandma did really well was worry. And I don't know if you have family members that you grew up with in your home, whether your parents or grandparents were big worriers, but my grandma would do it like it was a badge of honor. It, and there was this feeling that, or this thing, this message communicated to me as a child that the more you worried, it meant the more you care. So, of course, we want to be good, caring people, so we should worry a lot. And it was almost as if you didn't worry about something, you don't even care. So that trained me from a young age that, okay, I mean, I want to be a good person. I'm going to worry about all these things, that pattern. Now, what my Italian grandmother did not know, and what we know now, we have some new information. She didn't know that every time she was going through those worrisome thoughts, every thought we have, a neurotransmitter releases a chemical into our body. And those chemicals are either going to contribute to our health and wellness, or the chemicals are going to contribute to our dis-ease and disease eventually. So we have this information now. We know that our thoughts release the chemicals. Cortisol predominantly is the one that at high doses of cortisol, the stress hormone, it's going to contribute to those diseases, illnesses, increased pain in the body. And then a lot of the healing chemicals you've heard of, I'm sure, serotonin and dopamine. So I want you to think of it as your body almost as like if it was this body of water, okay? And if you were dumping pollutants in it, dumping sewage in that water, or, there's oil spills in the water, of course, the fish that live there, they're going to start to die. You're going to see them up on the shore. Well, if you think about your body is like your environment for you to take care of, and that it's our responsibility now that we have this information that it's our thoughts that create the environment of either health or not health in the body. It's our responsibility to be better stewardships of the thoughts that we're thinking. Now, I recently went away a couple of weeks ago. I was in Mexico with my partner, and we picked up something for his son. And it was one of those hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil monkeys. And we brought it home to him, and we wanted to teach to him about, watching what goes in your eyes, what you're watching, what you're hearing, what you're speaking, that all those things do contribute to our health and our happiness and our joy and our a level of peace, as well as the health of our body. So if you think about every time that we have worrisome thoughts, it's like maybe you picture this billow of smoke. We've all seen those factories and parts of the cities where it's puffing out with the environment, and that when we're having worrisome thoughts, that we're putting this pollutants into the body, and that this community of our cells, so we can think of ourselves as people, or if we use the analogy of the body of water, as the fish in the water. Well, we're not really giving them a good environment to live in if we're dumping these pollutants in. And our thoughts oftentimes are determined by what we do, watch, and listen to, and the words that we speak. So I'm going to pause for a couple moments here, because I want this to be something that you practice some of these mind training, brain training techniques with me as we go. And really, the first, very most important one is awareness. We need to be aware. Do we do this? I had years and years, decades and decades actually, where I didn't know what I was thinking about. I never paid attention to what I was thinking about. It was like this backtrack that was going on over here. And then I would just be like, wow, I feel so stressed out. I feel so, I don't really feel good. I didn't listen to what was going on in the background. So just pause for a moment, and just in your day to day, if you could consider, have there been a lot of worrisome thoughts? And you even take a moment to close your eyes what are the nature of your thoughts so far today? I'm sure there's been some productive ones and necessary thoughts, of course, to go through your work day or however you're going through your day. So the first step is being aware of the worrisome thoughts so we can do something about them. Now, stress. So we understand now too that over 90% of illnesses is caused by stress. And unfortunately, what most of our society believes is a little bit more of this victim mentality, where I'm a victim of these stressors that are outside me. Like if that person would just behave better, I wouldn't be as stressed. Or, if that situation changed, or this person was not that way. When we blame our stress on things outside us and we put ourselves in a very helpless victim mode, not helpful at all. Because it's really not the situations, it's what we think about the situations, our analysis, our commentary on them. So, paying attention even to your language, like how many times a day or a week do you say things like, oh, that's so terrible, that's so awful, that's so sad, that's so, where you're really analyzing situations in that way. As I was preparing for this, I was thinking of Viktor Frankl, who probably many of you have heard of. He was the person who was in a Nazi concentration camp for a number of years. And he went on later when he got out of that, Man's Search for Meaning. And in that, he talks about how when he was in this situation, now all of his family were killed, wife and children. He was the only survivor in the concentration camp. And he talked about in his book how he coped with it, training his brain, his mind, in order to cope and survive this. So he talked about how he closed his eyes and pictured the mountains of Salzburg, how he would remember the watercolor painting of the Bavarian woods. He spoke of a time where he was digging a ditch, and on a mound of dirt, a bird came and landed, and it reminded him of the grace and beauty of his wife. And it was using his mind in that way to picture beauty, good memories, that got him through it. And he went on to inspire a lot of people. For the rest of his life, he traveled speaking and inspiring others and writing books and lecturing. So if someone can do it in that situation, then we can learn to do it in our situation. You have probably figured out by now, we can't wait until this situation ends in order to stop worrying. Like perhaps some of us might have thought, well, once COVID's over, then I can, get back to my life and I won't worry as much. But then we have the situation in Ukraine that comes up, right? And then when this situation resolves, there'll be something else. So we have to learn to take control, not be victims, where we take the responsibility of what's going on in this environment. Like we are like the captain of this environment. So how do we train the mind? The mind is a lot like a puppy. And some of you might have puppies and have tried to train it, so you will know. Otherwise, maybe you have a friend who's had a puppy or seen the way that they behave, but they are all over the place. If you don't train your puppy, it will come into your house, it's going to go into your garbage and eat stuff that's going to make it sick, or get the garbage all over the floor. It'll chew up your favorite slippers. If you let it outside, it'll run right in the middle of the road. And that's just the way the mind is when it's not trained. It is all over the place and goes to, dangerous places, so to speak, meaning places that are going to release those toxic chemicals into our body and get us into trouble. So it needs training. We who have gone through higher education and reading lots of books, our culture really puts a lot of value in educating ourselves and learning a lot. And that's a wonderful thing. I wish there was more emphasis on training the mind for greater amount of peace and health. And actually, when we train the mind, we're also able to have a more creative ability and think more clearly. So it benefits in so many ways. So the first way of training the mind, we'll get right into it now, and I want you guys to work right with me on this, is the awareness. We need to be aware and know where there's a problem and start there in order to start moving towards a more trained mind. It takes time. Just like a puppy takes time to train, now the mind is just as tricky as that. Some people have called it monkey mind. You might have heard that. Well, you know how hard it is to train a monkey, right? So awareness is the key. Being aware. The analogy that I think of is I want you to consider what it looks like. Maybe you've seen those nature shows where there's a tiger who's stalking its prey, right? And they're very quiet and they're walking very cautiously because they're listening intently and they're looking and they're trying to sense and feel for their prey. And that's the way we need to be diligent to watch our thoughts instead of just letting it run amok. So watching the thoughts. And then being aware of some of when mindfulness, we call it mind traps. And these are habits of the mind that all of us have, some of these same mind traps, and they're like a default mode. If your mind's not trained, it's definitely going to fall into one of these traps. Okay. And I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but one of them, and this is one that it was probably one of my top ones that I've worked on a lot. And I still do it at times, but I catch myself a lot sooner, and that's catastrophizing. So catastrophizing is when something happens that we didn't expect. We perceive it as not a good thing, but then it's that snowball effect where we think of worst case scenario. Like, oh, this happened. Now it's going to lead to this and that and that and that all the way down the line. An example that I think of is I used to be a school teacher and I taught third grade for a number of years. So one day I walk into my classroom and my principal's there. This is just in the morning time before school even started. And I say, good morning, my principal. And she had the most like furrowed brow, angry look, like this, like she was just really upset, and darted away into her office. Now, this was before I had any mindfulness training, so I started freaking out. I started walking back down the hallway to my classroom, like, oh my gosh, what the heck is going on? What did I do? She's mad at me. Perhaps I didn't handle a situation appropriately, maybe with a student, and then maybe a parent's called in. Now, by lunchtime, I was visioning and that I was going to be called into her office with the human resources director. And by the end of the day, I had myself fired from my job, homeless on the street. And I'm really not even exaggerating with that. But that's what our minds can do. So I want you to pause for a moment, because I want this to be something that it's not just a lecture I'm giving you. Otherwise, it's just kind of philosophy up in the mind. We want to practice these things. So awareness. Do you catastrophize? So think about some situation in your life or in the world that you consider something unwanted. And I just want you to recognize if you have been catastrophizing about it. It can be something right in your own world to do with your children, your partner, your own little world, or the big world at large. And I encourage you to close your eyes for a moment as you do that, so you can really reflect. And this isn't to judge ourselves, just to have awareness. Okay. So how do we get out of catastrophizing? Because that's something I catch myself in. Well, if we're catastrophizing, that means we're out into the future. And if we come back to this moment, present, okay, what's true right now in this moment? Presence. And then we say, okay, this is the facts, this is the data of this moment, and that's what I'm going to take rather than way down there. And there's a little really quick things that brings you into the present moment. And you could jot this down if you want to remember it. It's called the 4-3-2-1 of presence. So we'll practice it right now. I want you to just look around the room that you're in and look at 4 different things. And, sometimes when we look at something, we're so in our mind, we almost like look past it. I want you to really look at it. So turn and look around the room and even name what it is. 4 different things. Good. Now I want you to go to 3 things that you feel. So reach your hand out and just feel the texture of something that might be out in front of you on your desk or table. Feel whether it's rough or smooth, feel the temperature of it. Maybe if it's hard or firm or soft. To 3 different things. Good. Now, 2 things that you hear. Now, aside from my voice, because I'll stop talking in a moment, just get real quiet and listen in your environment. You can hear 2 different sounds. Good. And you don't have to go off and do a story about the sounds, just notice them. And then 1 taste in your mouth. Now, there might not be any taste in your mouth if you haven't just eaten, but it's just bringing us to the present moment. We use our senses to bring us back here. Because if we're not in the present moment, we're in the mind down there. Senses bring us back here. Okay, so this present moment. Another thing that gets us out of catastrophizing, because that can be very, very worrisome, right? We worry about the worst case scenario happening, is to focus on beauty. And this reminds me of this time I was going for a walk in one of my favorite parks around here, and there's a lake that you can walk around. Well, a lot of times geese like to be here. The Canadian geese come over to where I'm living now in upstate New York, and they come around this lake, and there's a lot of goose poop, okay? So the whole walk, I was going there to have like a nice peaceful walk in nature, and I noticed my focus was only on the goose poop. I'm trying to avoid stepping in it, of course, so that was kind of a good reason, but it was like I was obsessed about it. That's all I was focusing on was on goose poop. And I thought, wow, isn't that a great analogy of how we can go through our life, where all we focus is on the goose poop in our path and in our life, and not all the beauty around us. I mean, I was at a beautiful park. There was a lake, there was sunshine, beautiful wildflowers and trees, and all my focus was on the goose poop. So making it a practice to choose to focus on beauty. And that reminds me of a quote by Wayne Dyer: there is beauty in every circumstance. There's beauty everywhere, even in the worst of circumstance. Even in the worst of circumstance, there is beauty. Can we find and look for that beauty? So I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment and see if you can train your mind here. Now, this is going to train that puppy that's not going to run out in the road. Keep it in the yard. What is one piece of beauty from a challenging circumstance right now? Close your eyes for this. A lot of times it's the love of people that come in to help and support in a situation, right? All right, now I'm going to ask you to keep your eyes closed a little bit longer. And I'm just going to bring some images to mind that I want you to have the idea or picture these images in your mind to help us focus on beauty. Mountains, a forest, a snowflake, an apple tree, the ocean, the sun, a baby's face. Now I'm going to ask you to take one of your hands and touch your thumb to your first finger and have your thumb touch each of the 4 fingers on that hand, thinking of 4 other things of beauty, things that you find beautiful. Go ahead and do that right now, please. Good. Okay. And then, after we do these little practices, just check in. How'd that make you feel? Because you just gave your environment of all your beings of cells a beautiful little bath of those healing chemicals, serotonin and the dopamine, and you stopped the cortisol for a while. Okay, so another mind trap that we need to be aware of, because these are here working on training our mind right now, is how the mind wants to exaggerate the negative and totally discount the positive. I mean, there could be 10 good things that go on in our day. There could be 100 good things that go on in our day, but our mind wants to focus on the one thing that didn't go well. We do that to ourselves too, right? Where we might do a whole bunch of 8 hours long of great things in our day. And if we make one little mistake, that's what we focus on. So it's important we train our mind away from that. So this is another mind training technique I'm going to lead you through right now. So I'd like you to close your eyes again for a moment and consider something in the last week that's brought you joy, some type of an experience, a moment that brought you joy. This doesn't have to be a big thing. Oftentimes the moments of joy we have something to do with a connection to another person, an animal, or nature, some moment of joy. Choose one. And if you don't have one yet, just consider some connection, some lovely connection you had with another person or animal or nature, and hold that in your mind. And I want you to bring in more of the details of it now, of your situation, your moment, of where you were, feeling the environment more, the colors, the things that were there. Who else was present? Any sounds that were there? And then as if you rewind it and you're replaying that moment, watch it again in your mind, like you're re-experiencing that moment of joy. Most of all, stay with it. Feel that feeling again of it. What were the feelings there? Was there a feeling of love there? Was there a feeling of appreciation? Feeling a connection? So do you see how we don't even have to have the actual experience? We can remember it or imagine it in our mind and begin to use our minds for good to help us. So another thing that gets us out of, trains our brain away from exaggerating the negatives and discounting the positives is gratitude. And I'm sure you've heard a lot about gratitude. You know a lot about gratitude. It's kind of like, oh yeah, but it needs to be a formal practice, was what I would recommend if you really wanted to contribute to your greatest health and wellness. There's been tons of amazing research about the positive effects of gratitude when you make it a formal practice. Somebody that I like to follow is Sean Aker, who he was really near the beginnings of the positive psychology movement out of Harvard and did a lot of research. In some of his most recent research, this is a formula that he says is very effective, and that is to think of something in the last 24 hours. Well, 3 things in the last 24 hours that you're grateful for. And why I'm saying the last 24 hours is then your brain has to scan the last 24 hours to look for something to be grateful for. And it's in that scanning that it's training the brain to make those new neural pathways to search for good things instead of its default mode where it always wants to search for bad things. So I'm gonna stay quiet for a minute while you work on training your mind and consider 3 things in the last 24 hours that you're grateful for. Blessings that happen, good things that happened. They don't have to be big, little things count. Okay, great. How does that feel? Your environment of your billions of cells that you are taking care of just got another nice clean dose of beautiful chemicals to help them be healthier in mind and body. So another thing that I want you to be aware of, that is a mind trap we fall into and we have to watch out for, like, remember that analogy of the tiger who's hunting for these things, is negative self-talk. So oftentimes we would never talk to other people the way that we talk to ourselves in our minds. And I know for me, um, sense of direction has been something that has been a challenge for me my whole life. I think the greatest invention of all time is navigation. So I no longer get lost. But before navigation came along, I got lost a lot. And it was also before my training. And I would be like driving my car and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'd be literally pounding my head. Bani, you're so dumb. And talking to myself in that way. And as I've taught the mindfulness-based stress reduction program for a number of years, and we work on negative self-talk, to hear some of the things that people say to themselves. And there's things that are just culturally accepted to insult ourselves. You know, even when people say duh to themselves if they forget something, that's pretty mean to say. Like, you know, we don't duh each other, so why do it to yourself? Or hopefully we don't do each other. Or even using some of the phrases that are common in our culture, like if we forget something, oh, I'm having a senior moment. Well, that's not very nice to say. Everybody forgets things, right? So I want you to pause for a moment and just reflect. Is there a time when you may mess up or what you consider a mistake? Just close your eyes and reflect so you can be aware right now. If you use negative self-talk, and what is it that you say to yourself? Is it name calling? Now let's agree, even when you think about that, I want you to notice something. Even realizing that mean thought you have towards yourself or feeling, notice how that felt in your body. Because unfortunately, because I made you think of that, it actually released some cortisol and some of the stress hormone, because it does not sit right in our body to talk negatively to ourselves. It's very important to have positive self-talk. We don't tolerate bullies out there in our schools or in our workplaces. So why would we tolerate a bully living up here? So make a decision and an intention to kick that bully to the curb and not let them back, and catch that. And if you catch yourself at the beginning, as you start to train your mind, that way you'll catch yourself. You say, nope, I take that back. And then just say, I love you. I think you're a genius and you're awesome. You know, some positive things, like maybe 3 positive things to make up for the 1 insult in your mind training. Okay, so I think that the last thing that I'll talk to you about is to consider upgrading some of those if we have a pattern. So I talked about how, you know, my mom, my grandma were big worriers, and I could just continue that pattern, you know, and be a worrier. It's what my family did. You know, my mom did, my grandma did it, so I do it. So do we have some things like that, well, some habits of thought like that, like worry, for instance, that it would be time for us to say, you know, they didn't know any better and I know better, so I'm going to change that habit of behavior. So I'm going to pause for a moment for you to reflect on that. Okay. Now, a really great tool that if you do find yourself, like, you know, you're in the stress response, when we're in the stress response, lots of cortisols shooting into our body, very unhealthy, like as if you were dumping tons of toxic waste for your cells to bathe in. That's what it's like when we're in that fight or flight response of worry. So teaching you some best tool I know to get out of that, aside from the ones I already mentioned, is breath work. And a lot of times when people say, like, we know to breathe, like take a deep breath, and they go like that. Well, you're taking oxygen in. What we really need to do is get rid of carbon dioxide. So exhale, 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 exhale. So right now, as I'm talking, exhale all that carbon dioxide out, because carbon dioxide literally is waste, right? We took in the oxygen, our body used it, and it releases the carbon dioxide. But a lot of times we don't release all of it. We just release some of it. And there's a breath that's really effective where you breathe in, and then on your exhale, you go, ha, 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 ha. Now you could do it with the ha sounds, which I like to do because I think it feels amazing. Or you could just do it like, ha, ha, ha. So I'm going to ask you to do 3 of those, and you decide whether you're going to do them audible, like the ha, 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 letting all that carbon dioxide out, or the ha, ha, ha. You really have to do it, practice it. It won't, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. These things only work if you do them. How does that feel now that you did that? Do you feel a little bit of like your body just kind of relaxed and maybe let go a little bit more? You maybe feel a little more grounded and steady. Good. Well, there's lots of breathing practices, and I'm going to lead you through another one right now. So I'd like you to get really comfortable in your seat. So adjust yourself if you need an extra pillow at your low back or somewhere to feel comfortable. And I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, so that, because 80% of input comes in through the eyes. And when we are kind of working on right now, it is some mind training to create this beautiful environment of clean air and water, so to speak, for our cells of our body and our organs to bathe in and heal in. So let's do this breath work together. So start with just breathing in through your nose and exhale through your mouth a few times. Through the nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth. One more time. Good. Now just notice your breath. We can breathe with your mouth closed now, in and out through the nose, and just notice it. Notice if it's short and shallow, or if it's a little bit longer. Notice if it's rough and bumpy or smooth. And no judgment on the breath at all, just noticing. Good. Now put one hand on your belly and the other hand on your chest. And we're going to breathe with our diaphragm now. Diaphragm is that breathing muscle below the rib cage. And it kind of, that dome-shaped diaphragm flattens out on your inhale, pushing the belly out. So on your inhale, I want you to just let the belly expand out. And on the exhale, it's going to go back in. And why we have a hand on the chest is I want you to feel that the belly goes out before the chest does. And you can kind of exaggerate that even as we're learning to do this. So inhale, expand the belly out like a balloon inflating. And then exhale, let it deflate. And if you feel like you've got that, you can lower your hands to wherever they're comfortable. And you're breathing with your diaphragm. Whenever we breathe with the diaphragm, we get more oxygen in the body. The breath slows down. So breathe in for 3 counts and out for 3 counts. Now, anytime we slow down our breathing, there's a message that goes to the brain that says, oh, he or she is breathing slower. Everything must be okay. I can stop sending out the cortisol, dumping toxins into the body, and I can start sending out the healing chemicals. Breathing in for 3 counts and out for 3 counts. Continue that a little bit longer, but another way to breathe with the diaphragm is to focus on the lowest ribs. So you might even use your hands to feel where the lowest ribs are. And I want you to see if you can widen them apart from each other now on the inhale. Just a little bit. They're not going to move too much. Even a ½ inch is great. And on the exhale, they'll come back together. On the inhale, they widen. On the exhale, they come back together. Breathing in for 3 counts and out for 3 counts. Good. Diaphragmatic breathing, breathing slowly. Very helpful. Now, I'm going to do a few different types of breath work here with you together, just because the mind also, when it's in its young training stages, it gets bored easily. So we have to keep it moving. This is a breath that really calms the nervous system and brings in the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, the rest and digest part. And that's when you breathe in, breathe out, and then breathe out a little bit more. So practice that breath with me for a few cycles. Just a regular inhale, a regular exhale, and then exhale a little bit more. Inhale, exhale, exhale a little more. And in that second bit of exhale, really feel your body sink into your seat. Like you're really feel your seat against whatever you're sitting on and your feet on the floor. And again, can you notice it's based on that idea that we need to exhale more than we do? We're releasing more of the exhale by exhaling twice and just inhaling once. Good. I'm going to do another breath that's similar to that, where you take a nice big breath in and you're going to exhale it in 3 parts. So you exhale a little bit, pause, exhale a little more, pause, and then really empty the lungs to the point that you draw your navel right in towards your spine. You release that, a nice, beautiful inhale will come, filling the lungs with oxygen, and exhale it again in 3 parts. A little bit, pause, and the pauses don't need to be long, just for a brief moment. A little more, pause, and then exhale. Empty the lungs completely. Good. Do a couple more cycles of this. And the image I like to have in my mind as I do this breath is one of those waterfalls where you see the waterfall, the water coming down a little ways to a landing, and then it goes down a little more ways to another landing, and then all the way down into the pool of water below. Very good. Great. Now, there's another technique called 4 square breathing. So you picture in your mind a square that has 4 sides, of course, and you breathe 4 counts up each side of the square. So let's try just a couple breaths like this, where you inhale for 4 counts. And in your mind, you can imagine you're drawing up one side of the square and you inhale. You hold your breath for 4 counts as you draw a line across the top. And then you exhale for 4 counts as you draw the third side, and then you pause for 4 counts as you draw the bottom. Now that pausing for 4 counts is a little tricky, so I kind of speed up my counting there, and that's okay to do. Do one more time around that square with your 4 square breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, you breathe out for 4, and pause for 4. Good. You can let that go and just notice your breath and watch it. So then the typical breath is about 2 counts in and 2 counts out. Now, how do we know if we've taken ourselves out of the stress response? There's one simple way to know that. When we typically breathe and we're stressed, our breath is going to be inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. If you picture just these lines going up and down, up and down, up and down. When we induce the relaxation response, you'll be able to breathe in, breathe out, and there'll be a little pause at the bottom of your exhale. A little pause. I want you to notice if there's a pause there. Now that pause, it's not something you have to hold the breath and force. And perhaps it only lasts a second. Maybe it lasts 2. For some of you, it might even last 3 seconds. But whenever that inhale needs to come, allow it to come in. You breathe in, you breathe out, and then see if there's a little pause there. You can just rest in that still moment, like a little bit of hang time before the next inhale needs to come in. And don't Evaluate, is it long enough or not? Like I said, a second or two is wonderful. Notice the pause, rest in it. It's a beautiful place of silence and stillness where we're literally not doing anything, not even breathing, and just kind of rest there and let the inhale come when it needs to. Isn't that stillness beautiful? Like we chase after busyness and doingness, and it's in that beingness that really all the peace is. Well, our time is just about over for my speaking, and I hope that this has given you some good tools to begin to train your mind, or perhaps you're training it already and you can continue your training. And I'm pretty sure we're going to open up for some questions now.
Thank you so much, Bani, for such an insightful presentation about training our mind and managing our worries and thoughts, and giving us a fulsome toolkit to help train our mind and our brain. So thank you so much. Super insightful presentation. Everybody else thought so too, because we have quite a few questions that have come in from the audience. So I'll just dive right in there with yourself. And one of the big questions that came through was around how often should we do these brain training exercises? We're all living different lives and experiences. Is there any key moments in the day where, it'd be a good time to start that puppy training with ourselves?
Yeah, I guess it depends how quick do you want your puppy trained, right? So, kind of when we're learning anything, if you want to learn to be good at tennis and you just practice once a month, it's going to take quite a while to be good at it. So I would recommend to make some formal time of training where you actually sit and do one of the practices we did, and even start with a minute, like 1 minute a day, where it's formal training. I'm going to sit and do a formal practice. And that could be anything from, writing out those 3 things you're grateful for in the last 24 hours. It could be writing a paragraph about a beautiful, peaceful moment. It could be that breath work, which I would definitely recommend training every day, but start with a minute. So it's not too much and you feel like I don't have time for that. Everyone has a minute, right? And then you work up maybe 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And then there's all those moments during the day where we want to catch the thoughts. And so we don't have to find specific opportunities. Life gives us plenty of opportunities to train our mind. They're coming at a fast pace. Talk about school. This Earth school is really the hardest school there is in the universe.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And another question that came in too, sort of around how often, like timing around brain exercises, but more focused on the life course here. A participant asked if you have any specific advice for folks in retirement age. Like, would this change sort of some of the tools that you offer to folks looking to train their mind, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I talked about Ayurvedic medicine, which is the Indian medicine, and they say that, when we cross 50, 60, 70s, 80s, and so on, they call them the Vata time of our life, which our anxiety actually goes up. So we need more of this training. So I would recommend, putting in more time with the training, more breath work, and really all the same tools, but just doing them a little bit more often so that we can, stay calm and in a peaceful place.
Yeah, no, great advice. And we have another question here from the audience. Folks mentioned there with someone has a client with autism that is really struggling with social anxiety. And she finds breathing is helpful to calm down when she can actually notice she feels stress. But when it comes on too quickly, she has a hard time remembering to use her breath and has some pretty big outbursts. Do you have any suggestions for how to catch it early?
Yeah, well, being kind of in a good state. That's why, like, for a lot of us, if we do these techniques and kind of we build up some resilience. So when those stressful things come on, we're able to handle them more. But if we're already like, maybe the analogy of the gas tank is like almost going to run out, and then all of a sudden we've got to make it somewhere further, we're not going to make it. So building some resilience beforehand with like self-care, and it looks a little differently for different ones of what that self-care is. So if the person with autism they know they're going to go into a social situation that's stressful, what is it that really fills them up beforehand? Is it a hot bath, like being in hot warm water, or is it listening to their favorite music? What is it for them that really will fill their tank so they can have the resilience?
Yeah, for sure. And so these same techniques then you believe would work well with children and kids, or is there some modifications that would be needed?
Yeah, I mean, with children, because I work with children quite a bit, and I, was a school teacher, and I did that with children. It just, some of the practices are just shorter because they have shorter attention spans. But and kids, they visualize. They're really great at visualization. I actually love doing this with kids because I'll take them on a little journey in their mind and just tell them this, like they think it's storytelling, but I'm having all these wonderful, peaceful, empowering images through their mind, and it makes them feel really good about themselves. So with children, it's wonderful to start at a young age.
Yeah, for sure. And for folks listening, Bani, do you have any online breathing practice websites or resources that we can share with the group afterwards? We have a few questions coming in around that as well.
Yeah, sure. My website, which is just my name, so it's baniaiello.com, BANIAELLO.com.
Perfect.
And there's some resources there that you could email me too, and I could send you some, because I do have some on SoundCloud and some of those other platforms too.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so Ben shared that in the chat with the group, which is great. And as well too, we have some questions coming in around, finding it hard to stop and think about using the tools. So whether we're going online to look up the resources or we're trying to remember them in the moment, how do you do it? What are your strategies to be mindful of practicing?
I know this is such a good question because they only work if we do them, and remembering them when we're in a place of stress where we're like, we've been triggered and we're stressed, we're not even going to be able to think of any of these things. So that's why kind of building the resilience in the morning, make sure that you go out and do your day with a full cup of, because holes are going to get poked in that cup of your resilience and it's going to start draining out. So you want to start with a full cup. So I'd say start your day with these things. But then I've been a person with sticky notes. I used to put sticky notes all over my house. Breathe. What are you thinking? Because it would make me stop and like, oh my gosh, I'm in this negative thinking and it's going to spiral me down, down, down. So I'd have people my family would laugh at me. They'd be, in my kitchen cupboards and inside my cupboards and on my car dashboard and all that stuff. And even little tricks where I put a little timer in my phone to go off a couple times a day to remind me of some of these things.
Oh, that's a great tip. I am definitely someone who uses my phone reminders very, very often. So that's something I'm going to put in my toolkit. Thank you for sharing that. And another question's coming in here around brain health and the importance of combining exercise and nutrition. What advice can you give around eating habits, training your brain, and exercise?
Yes, well, I think as far as eating, we want stuff that's from the ground. We want natural, unprocessed stuff. Best if it's organic and not large amounts. It's good to stop eating when you're about 75% full. So there's room in there so that you can digest your food. And it's even good, like before you start eating, I've got kind of a little, bell on my table. So I ring it and then I take some deep breaths before I start, eating. And I typically, I'm like a fast eater by nature, and that's been really hard for me to slow down. And I'm really trying to slow that down even more. That's probably been my most challenging thing. And I think what I'm going to do, because I saw these gentlemen one time when I was out for dinner, and they were eating their food with chopsticks. It wasn't in a Chinese restaurant or anything, but they were just using chopsticks. And I'm like, and they were both like these elderly men that were like slim and trim. I'm like, it must be the chopsticks, because it forces you to eat nice and slowly because they can only take small portions. So that's a good tip. So yes, definitely eating healthy and exercise. I'm a big proponent of exercise. I would say gentle yoga. I'm partial to that. Not a really hard vinyasa flow or anything crazy. Gentle yoga, I think, is optimal.
Awesome. Yeah, I need to be more of a yogi myself, so maybe this is my sign to go practice some more.
And chair yoga is great.
Pardon?
Chair yoga is great too.
Chair yoga, yeah, no, absolutely. I've done one chair yoga class and it was quite successful. And actually, I just wanted to let everybody on the call know that we're getting a little short on time. So I think I have time for one more question with Bani. And so here it is from our audience. Do you have any tips to stop ruminating thoughts?
Yeah, I know those ruminating thoughts. I can definitely relate to that and interrupting them, because it feels like instead of us controlling our mind, it's controlling us, right? And that's where some of those things of like focusing on the beauty, trying to look at the beauty, really look at the beauty, and the gratitudes, all those tools that I offered are very helpful. There's also something that I really didn't have time to share today, emotional freedom technique, where you're tapping. You're literally tapping on parts of your body. And I'm just going to go through it now as I'm talking about it. And it lowers cortisol levels. So it can get you to a point where you can maybe use some of the other tools, because sometimes when we're so ruminating and we can't even use the tools. And so if you were to just Google, I encourage you to Google emotional freedom technique, and you're basically tapping on these different meridian points. And it's proven in many, many studies that lower cortisol levels. So it's called emotional freedom technique, or EFT. And there's YouTube videos you can watch where they will walk you right through it.
Awesome. Well, Bani, on behalf of U of T Mississauga, I'd like to thank you for your presentation and your responses to the questions to our alumni audience. So thank you so much for your time and for being here with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's wonderful to be with you.
Alrighty, thank you so much. And to our audience, I just want to mention that we've received a lot of questions today, and we apologize if we weren't able to get to yours. So everybody who registered for today's event will also receive a link to the full wellness webinar series once it has concluded in early March, which I believe this was the last one in the series. So you should be getting that soon. And also, if you enjoyed today's webinar, be sure to check out the full program of past wellness webinars on the UTM Alumni YouTube page. As well, for upcoming event listings and more, please visit our UTM Alumni webpage. And you should see links popping up in the chat box for those pages now. So Ben will be sharing those. And thanks again so much for joining us. We really look forward to hosting you again at another U of T alumni event. Take care, everyone.